Alliance officials and analysts are increasingly warning that Beijing's expanding military reach, strategic investments in Europe, and growing influence operations are reshaping the threat environment in ways that require NATO to broaden its focus beyond a traditional Russia-centric posture. The sudden loss of normal radio and data links from a Chinese-registered aircraft over European airspace triggered alarm among NATO command centers, prompting urgent coordination between air defense units and civil aviation authorities to determine intent and ensure skies remain secure. Authorities reported that a Cathay Pacific aircraft experienced an unexplained communications outage while transiting Romanian airspace, a disruption that led to scrambled intercepts and heightened scrutiny of how non-NATO carriers operate near Alliance airspace. Rapid reaction fighters, including Swedish-built Gripens operating under NATO arrangements, were vectored to shadow and identify the silent aircraft, a maneuver that unfolded against a backdrop of renewed Russian signaling and left alliance planners uneasy about simultaneous challenges from Moscow and Beijing. Cathay Pacific is investigating why a Hong Kong-London flight lost contact temporarily, launching an internal review alongside coordination with aviation authorities to establish the technical and procedural reasons for the brief communications outage. A brief loss of contact triggered jets, highlighting NATO airspace vigilance, as alliance and national quick reaction procedures were activated to ensure the flight posed no security risk while civil aviation agencies worked to re-establish normal communications. The Airbus A350-1000, Flight CX-257, was carrying over 300 passengers to Heathrow on July 4, with crew and ground teams managing the situation while authorities prioritized passenger safety and the integrity of international air traffic corridors. Contact was lost with Romanian Civil Air Traffic Control while transiting their airspace, prompting immediate tracking efforts, coordination with neighboring control centers, and contingency measures to maintain situational awareness of the aircraft's position and status. NATO activated a quick reaction alert, prompting Hungarian fighters to intercept the jet, a standard precautionary measure that ensured identification, monitoring, and deterrence capability until communications were restored and the situation assessed as non-threatening. Hungary's defense minister said the alert was issued at 1:42 p.m. Central European Time, providing a precise timestamp that helps map the response timeline and clarifies how rapidly military and civil authorities coordinated to address the incident. Cathay Pacific stressed that the aircraft and people on board were safe at all times, reassuring relatives and the public while committing to a thorough investigation to determine the cause of the interruption and prevent future occurrences. The airline says it is reviewing the event to understand the loss of radio contact, examining flight data, crew logs, and communications records together with air traffic authorities to identify any procedural or technical fixes needed. Cathay Pacific is owned by Hong Kong's Swire Group, with Beijing's Air China and Qatar Airways holding minority stakes, Qatar Airways with around 9%. A complex ownership structure that occasionally factors into diplomatic and regulatory scrutiny during international incidents. The Hungarian defense minister said, and I quote, "An alert was ordered for a NATO quick reaction alert, interceptor standby pair of aircraft because a Chinese-registered A350 type aircraft traveling on the Hong Kong-London route, while located in Romanian airspace, failed to establish contact with Romanian civilian air traffic control." The Hungarian readiness aircraft took off at 1:51 p.m. and visually warned the Chinese-registered aircraft near the Hungarian border, after which it established contact with air traffic control. Following the completion of the mission, the standby Gripen pair of aircraft returned to its base in Kecskemét, unquote. Cathay Pacific told the South China Morning Post that the flight continued to its destination after communications were restored, reassuring the public that normal operations resumed once contact with air traffic control was re-established and that all passengers remained safe throughout the incident. NATO's scrambled jets came amid a recent Kremlin remark about keeping an eye on the alliance, a comment that heightened sensitivity among European defense planners and added a geopolitical tinge to what officials emphasized was a routine air safety interception. The Kremlin linked its nuclear doctrine, buffer zone push and demands on Kiev to developments ahead of the NATO summit, using strategic messaging to frame territorial and security claims as prerequisites for any negotiated de-escalation while signaling red lines to Western capitals. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov said nuclear weapons would only be used if Russia's existence was at stake, a formulation intended to reassure some audiences that Moscow sees nukes as a last resort contingency while simultaneously preserving broad ambiguity about what constitutes an existential threat. Peskov claimed Russia was achieving its goals in Ukraine without resorting to nuke escalation, arguing that conventional operations and political pressure had so far met strategic objectives and that nuclear use remained unnecessary and counterproductive to those aims.
This event is attracting great interest, including from us. We will, of course, be following all the news and information coming out of Ankara. In the run-up to the summit, we heard many statements concerning our country. Unfortunately, these were not statements about constructive engagement and dialogue, but rather statements of a confrontational nature. We will see what documents emerge from all that, what statements are made, what papers are signed, and what is said during the bilateral meetings on the sidelines. You know that we are maintaining contact with the Americans through working channels, and we hope that their efforts aimed at directing the situation to a peaceful course will become successful. At least, as the Russian president has repeatedly said, we will remain open to it. Here I would like to remind you that we would prefer to settle this conflict through political and diplomatic means. And only since the Kiev regime is not ready to engage in peace settlement, we are continuing our special military operation until the complete achievement of our goals. As of now, we keep liberating Russian regions, including the Donetsk People's Republic. You know that capture of Kostiantynivka has been a very important step in tactical and strategic regards. Besides this, our armed forces continue to create a security zone or a buffer zone. This work will continue.
Peskov insisted Russia was too responsible to start World War III and described nuclear weapons as a last resort trump card, language meant to reassure global audiences while keeping deterrent ambiguity intact. He said Russia always responds to strikes in any conflict it is involved in, framing retaliatory actions as a consistent, predictable element of Moscow's military posture. He urged Europe to stop seeing Russia as a threat, stop ignoring its concerns and resume dialogue, arguing that renewed diplomatic engagement would diffuse tensions and address security grievances he says have been dismissed. Peskov repeated claims that the special military operation in Ukraine was successful and insisted it had been forced by Western policies, presenting the intervention as both justified and effective in meeting Moscow's stated objectives. The Kremlin said Kiev and Western policies allegedly forced Russia to create a buffer zone along the border, contending that such measures were defensive necessities to protect against perceived encirclement. Peskov argued the operation was unavoidable because Europe and the US refused to listen to Moscow, portraying diplomatic failure as the proximate cause of military escalation. The Kremlin said Zelensky should pull Ukrainian troops back and legally recognize Russian territory, demanding concrete concessions it frames as prerequisites for any meaningful de-escalation or dialogue. Peskov also claimed the operation had turned into a real war because of Western involvement, asserting that external support for Kiev transformed limited action into a broader, protracted conflict.